Maxx Crosby is reportedly going to be available via trade. I'm going to break down how the Bucs can land him in a mega deal. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. I'd like to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. I am your host, James Yarcho, writer over at Bucs Report, covering the Buccaneers for over a decade now, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers, and for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. The final crossover Thursday of the season is sponsored by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. If you want the ultimate Super Bowl preview, check out Locked On Patriots, Locked On Seahawks for their final crossover ahead of Super Bowl 60. Is Trey Hendrickson or Maxx Crosby the better and more affordable decision for the Buccaneers? And would the Bucs have enough draft capital left if they were to make a trade for Maxx Crosby in order to address all of their defensive needs? I'm going to get into that all coming up in a little bit. But the big news and speculation here is that Jay Glazer said in an interview on Wednesday that he believes Maxx Crosby's time with the Raiders is over. When Glazer was asked if he thought Crosby's time with the Raiders was done, he said, "I do, probably before the draft." He was then asked what kind of haul the Raiders could get in a trade for Crosby, and Glazer said, quote, "Probably more than Micah." So the day it happened, no less than 20 teams called me and said, "Is this real? Can we get him? What's it for?" And I'm like, we're not there yet, but yes, it's real. It's a Crosby decision. He's not going through another rebuild. So in the trade for Parsons, the Packers gave up a 2026 first, a 2027 first, and Kenny Clark. So if Crosby is going to get more than that, there's going to be some sticker shock when the trade finally gets made. But let's break it down a little further. He said he's not going through another rebuild and that no less than 20 teams reached out to see if this was real. If Crosby isn't going to go through another rebuild, and assuming the Raiders do right by him and don't send him to some other terrible team, who could genuinely be out of the running? Well, everyone in the AFC West is out. No Chargers, no Chiefs, no Broncos. They're not going to trade Crosby and then have to face him twice a year. Then the Titans, Jets, Cardinals, Saints, Giants, Eagles, Packers, Jaguars, Vikings, Bills, Dolphins, Texans, Browns, Steelers, Ravens, Bears, Lions. They're all probably out of it for one reason or another, unless some of them are willing to send back a proven edge rusher or they do something insane to create cap space. A lot of those teams cannot take on Maxx Crosby's contract. Then some of them are just bad football teams and wouldn't be in the running. So that leaves the Commanders, Seahawks, Bengals, Rams, 49ers, Patriots, Colts, Falcons, Panthers, and Cowboys. Even though the Cowboys are $30 million over the cap, they would find a way to make something happen just so that Jerry Jones gets the headlines and gets lots of TV time. So the Bucs would be competing against most of their own division, plus 5 other teams in the NFC, in addition to the Colts and Patriots, because that's exactly what the Patriots need after already having one of the best defenses in the NFL and getting to the Super Bowl is Maxx Crosby. I think you can reasonably put the Falcons and Colts towards the bottom of this list because, number one, the Falcons just invested heavily in the youth on the defensive side. So unless they're going to send one of those new young pieces to Vegas as part of the deal, they would have to bench one of them, and that's not what they're looking to do. Then the Colts, who started off on fire, fizzled out. I'm not sure they're as good as we thought they were, and it'll really depend on what Daniel Jones is able to do coming off of that Achilles rupture. Not to mention, they're in the AFC, so they're going to see the Raiders more often than these NFC teams will. So the Bucs would have to outbid the remaining teams. The Commanders, Bengals, and Cowboys all have higher first-round picks than the Bucs, and the Rams have 2 firsts that they could send this year if they wanted, including one that is higher than the Bucs. That puts Crosby and Verse out there together, and that would be absolutely insane. It would give the Raiders 3 top 30 picks to use in this draft alone. They could take Mendoza, a wide receiver, and then probably a defensive player as well. That's going to be nearly impossible to beat if the Rams actually put that offer on the table. For the Bucs, you're starting with their 2026 and 2027 first-round picks. That's basically a non-negotiable. That is where it starts. Now, their first this year is 15th, but the hope would obviously be that if they land Crosby, the first next year is closer to 30 or later than it is to that 15th spot that they're in right now. That's not as tough of a pill to swallow when you think about the fact that no one that they get at 15 is going to walk in and immediately do what Crosby has proven that he can. It's an instant upgrade and immediately puts the Bucs firmly in the contender category. But there has to be more, right? So now you're talking a day 2 pick either this year or next year, maybe even both. Next year is more likely if you include a player in the deal. So you could be talking without a player, a first and a third in 2026, and then a first and maybe a fourth or a fifth in 2027. So what if they do include that player? Who would be up for grabs? We talked yesterday about one of the insiders floating Chris Godwin's name out there, and I do not like that idea as I laid out on that show. But Tom isn't the only one throwing that out there as an option. Trevor Sikkema had said as much in one of his proposals for a trade, but it was a trade for Nick Herbig, not Maxx Crosby. So if he's using Godwin as a piece in a trade with Pittsburgh, some may be willing to do the same in this deal. I don't like it, and I think the backlash for both inside and outside of the building would be huge, but I guess you can't completely rule it out. Now, who would I be willing to give up? I mentioned Jalen McMillan. I love J-Mac, and I think he has a really bright future with this organization. But assuming Evans returns, you're still loaded at receiver. The Raiders, including GM John Spytek, who was with the Bucs when they drafted McMillan, could view him as a really intriguing player that they could build towards the future with. Imagine being Fernando Mendoza, being the number 1 pick in the draft, coming into the NFL with Ashton Genty as your running back, Brock Bowers as your tight end. You have Jalen McMillan there, and then the Raiders could use that 15th overall pick that the Bucs sent them for Mekhi Lemon. That is a core of young offensive studs that can be the centerpiece of your franchise for the next decade. Now, I would also consider Zion McCollum. If you ship him off, now you're going to have a need at corner, but you're also going to see whether or not you gave him all that money a little too soon. If he does not return to 2024 form, you're getting out from that money while still upgrading the defense. Now you've put yourself in a position where you could bring back Jamel Dean to start opposite of Benjamin Morrison, leave Jacob Parrish in the slot. You still have Tyke Smith and Antoine Winfield Jr. on the back end. You need to build up some depth, but that's an option that the Raiders could find appealing, again, knowing that Spytek was part of the group that brought McCollum in the first place. Kalijah Kancey is another interesting one that, while I wouldn't want to trade him, I think that option could be on the table. It's no secret that he has struggled with injury, and you're rapidly approaching a point where you either, for lack of a better term, have to poop or get off the pot. He's entering his 4th season. He's going to have his 5th-year option picked up, but what about after that? Can you rely on him enough to give him another contract? He has all the talent in the world where he could absolutely go out to Vegas and explode. But right now, it's a high-risk proposition to give him another contract if he continues his injury-plagued ways. I would even honestly consider Yaya Diaby as part of this trade. If they wanted a young edge rusher with potential to take the place of Maxx Crosby, I can see that being something the Bucs could be willing to do. Yes, it puts you back into a similar position that you're in now, but we know who Yaya Diaby is. We know he's not the elite alpha edge guy, so you could still draft one to compete with David Walker, who we all forget about because he missed his entire rookie season with the torn ACL, and have someone else there to complement Crosby. There honestly are not a ton of guys that I would say are untouchable for the Bucs, but there are some. In that category, I put under contract right now, not including obviously Mike Evans. If Mike Evans resigns, you're not trading him. If Levante David resigns, you're not trading him. But Chris Godwin, Tristan Wirfs, Emeka Ibuka, Vita Vea, Bucky Irving, and the Raiders probably wouldn't want Bucky Irving anyway, just because you have Ashton Genty there, and then Luke Gedeke. Other than that, there's a lot of players that could be sent back that I think would make sense, and the Bucs would be willing to listen about. The level of the player is obviously going to affect the compensation to the point of either changing the round that the pick is in, or you're getting another pick back in return. But the Bucs absolutely need to be in on these talks. It is imperative that Jason Licht and John Spytek open up a dialogue about this potential trade. It would be well worth the price of what you're going to give up. All that said, would the Bucs be better off signing Trey Hendrickson over trading for Maxx Crosby? I'm going to give you that answer next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay like I am, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. The Seattle Seahawks are 4.5-point favorites over the New England Patriots with an over-under of 45.5. Sam Darnold is the favorite to win the game's MVP at plus 115, followed by Drake May at plus 230, Jackson Smith and Jigba at plus 550, and then Kenneth Walker III at plus 850. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Finding a doctor you actually like can feel like discovering a diamond in the rough. Sure, you want someone who's in-network, nearby, and has availability, but you also want a doctor who listens, makes you feel comfortable, and explains things clearly. That kind of doctor exists, and finding them is easy with ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone that you love without all the hassle. We're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states, covering over 200 specialties from primary care and dentistry to dermatology and eye care. ZocDoc makes the process simple. You can search by specialty or symptoms and actually build a care team that works for you. You can see real-time availability and book instantly. No phone calls, no waiting on hold. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL to find and instantly book a doctor you love today. That's ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL. Thanks to ZocDoc for sponsoring this message. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, check out the Everydayer Club, the all-access tier. There's ad-free episodes, daily newsletters, exclusive perks, all-access only episodes. You can check it out by clicking the link in the show notes. So Mike reached out and asked me about the difference in Crosby versus Trey Hendrickson as far as cost is concerned. Here's the thing. Hendrickson is the cheaper option all around. Crosby is getting $30 million this year, $29 million next year, $26.5 million in 2028, and $27.43 million in 2029 in base salary. There's a potential out after the 2027 season, but you're locking in at least 4 years of one of the most productive pass rushers in the NFL since 2019. You're also paying a lot of money in those age 30, 31, and 32 seasons, which may not be a problem, to be completely fair, but that's when you could start to see the drop-off in production happening, so that could prove to be an issue when you have all that money tied up. Hendrickson, on the flip side, is already 31, so the production you get from him may not be what you're hoping for. Sure, it could absolutely be 10 or more sacks. It could also be Hassan Reddick from 2025. Now, his estimated market value on SpotTrack is over $25 million, on average annually. Over the cap, his actual production, over the cap is a production valuation. So what their production should have cost was under $3 million, despite him being paid $29 million. That is not good. That is a terrible return on investment. Now, he was dealing with a contract dispute. He was not happy in Cincinnati. The Cincinnati defense overall was just straight up terrible. So all of those could have played a factor. But this is a player that missed 10 games last season due to injury and has missed games in the past, who was on the other side of 30. At the same time, he did have double-digit sacks in 4 out of 5 seasons from 2020 through 2024 before having just 4 in 7 games last year. But you extrapolate that out into a full season, that averages out to 9.7 sacks over the course of 17 games in 2025. You could say that that's 9.5 sacks. You could say that that's 10 sacks. Either way, you are still getting production when he was on the field. Hendrickson will cost a pretty penny. Absolutely. There's no question about that. However, his contract will not be as much as Crosby's, and you're not dealing with the draft and or player compensation in order to land him. So ideally, you could get Hendrickson for around $20 to $25 million a year on a short-term deal, 1 or 2 years, and still get double-digit sacks out of him. But that's still a risk. The question the Bucs have to ask themselves is, are they willing to take that risk again at the edge spot after what they've been through the last couple of seasons? Or would you rather pay the money, pay the draft picks, and potentially a player in order to secure someone that you know is still in their prime and can dominate the game alongside the best in the league? I mean, Maxx Crosby is in a tier with guys like Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Aiden Hutchinson, and Micah Parsons. He is that level of player. Is that a player that you're willing to pay that steep price for in order to get him on your defense? Is that something that you want on this team? Is that the kind of player that can elevate Bowles' defense to resemble something closer to what we saw in 2020 and 2021? Absolutely. The answer is absolutely. Having that guy is going to have an effect on the entire defense. It's going to make the jobs of the guys in the secondary that much easier because there's consistent pressure on the quarterback. It's going to make the first 2 levels of the defense look that much better because it's going to open things up for guys like Kalijah Kancey, Vita Vea, David Walker, Yaya Diaby to get into the backfield because of the attention and manpower it takes just to slow Crosby down. You can't stop him, but you can try to slow him down. Will Trey Hendrickson have that effect? Maybe, but it's not on the same level. You could say the same about Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa or Leonard Floyd, these older guys that you're only signing for 1, maybe 2 years. Shoot, I mean, even Owe or Mafe, who are much younger, they're even younger than Crosby. They're not going to command the same respect or attention that Crosby does. That's not to say that they won't be productive, but they're not Maxx Crosby. So while these other guys are cheaper from contract compensation to trade, to the trade compensation, since you don't have to give up picks for free agents, obviously, it's going to be about what is going to help the Bucs most in getting to a Super Bowl in the next 2 years. Because that's your window right now. That's the time frame that you have before you have to start looking to replace guys like Vita, Mike, Chris, maybe even Baker Mayfield. So what is that worth to you? Is that worth a handful of draft picks and a player? Or do you feel that your team is still going to be in contention if you keep those assets and just sign a good but not an elite player? If I'm the Bucs, I'm doing whatever I can to land the elite player. There is a line that you have to draw, but I am trying my hardest to land him. I am trying at the same level that I tried to land Tom Brady. That is how hard you need to go after Maxx Crosby. If you are this Buccaneers team, that is the guy that you need. That is the guy that can come in and turn this entire defense around. Let's say that the Bucs do make this trade. How will that affect their draft strategy? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit? You know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster, and they boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that makes the real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us take a look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there's got to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make, and that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer, and you can even keep your existing number. And Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNFL. That's QUO.com/LockedOnNFL. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Wrapping things up here on a Maxx Crosby eccentric version of the Locked On Bucs podcast. Insider William texted in and asked, if we make a trade for Maxx Crosby, do you think we'll still have enough as far as draft capital to fix the defense? Great question, William. Look, if you give up a first and a third this year, you're still going to be in good shape. This draft is really similar to last year's in that there's not a lot of elite, top-tier, first-round graded talent, but there are guys that you're going to get on day 3 that have day 2 grades. It's deep. It's not elite. So think about it in the same way that we talked about last year's draft. And I'll get more into it as we get more into the draft process. But you saw a lot of guys being drafted on day 3, in the 4th and 5th round that we were projecting to go in the 2nd or in the 3rd. You can use now your 2nd round pick if you're the Buccaneers on a linebacker or a corner. Then you look to whichever position you didn't take in the 2nd when the 4th rolls around, along with running back, defensive line, interior, offensive line, and tight end. You're going to find guys, and Jason especially will find guys on day 3 that can contribute immediately. They may be in rotational roles, but they'll be contributors. You'll see an uptick in Elijah Roberts snaps. You'll see David Walker on the field. And Crosby isn't the only move that the Bucs would make before the draft. You can still go out and get a veteran starting linebacker to pair with a rookie linebacker. Maybe it's not Nakobe Dean, but you're going to get someone in there to fill that void. Now, would it be ideal if the Bucs had to start Servassier Dennis again next season? No, but it also wouldn't be the downfall of the entire team if you have Crosby out there wreaking havoc. You can mask one deficiency a lot better than you can mask 3. If you sign a coverage linebacker that's also reliable in run defense, now Voss isn't as much of a liability. You could still sign Tyler Algier or Brian Robinson for a relatively cheap price. So that's one less need that you have going into the draft. You could sign Rock Yassin or Tre'Davious White for cheap but experienced cornerback depth. There's still a lot of positions that you can address in free agency that won't break the bank, but will still give you the flexibility that you'll need in the draft if you pull off that trade. The other thing that the trade will do for you is that puts pending free agents on notice that, hey, we're going for it, and we're going for it right now. If you want to come to this team that's built to compete for a championship, let's all do it together. Everybody's going to have to take a little bit less. So you may not get as much money as you want, but there is a really good chance that you'll walk away from this season with some jewelry. You won't get as many big names as you did with Tom Brady. You're not going to get the Gronks and the Antonio Browns and the Leonard Fournettes and those kinds of guys. But some guys are going to say, you know what? I'm coming up on the end of my career. These guys just won a Lombardi a few years ago. Their coach won one. Some of these players won one. I think that could be a special team, and I'm going to give it a shot because they're the most interested in my services, of the teams that I know I can go to and truly compete in January and hopefully into February. I would say if the Bucs pull off this trade, or even just try to pull off this trade, they have a plan for what else they can do with those picks and that money that they'll have left over in order to give themselves the best chance to be in Super Bowl 61 or Super Bowl 62. Jason Licht has done this before. Mike Greenberg has manipulated the cap before. These are things that they are experienced in, and it was rewarded with a Lombardi trophy and Super Bowl rings. Maxx Crosby is that home run swing that you have to take if you're going to get into the next two Super Bowls, period. You have all the pieces on offense. You need a couple of depth pieces. You need a rotational piece of running back to replace Rachaad White, but you have the quarterback. You have the offensive line when they're healthy. You have the pass-catching weapons. Defensively, your biggest needs are an elite edge rusher and inside linebackers. Give yourself an opportunity by getting the best elite edge rusher that you could possibly get right now. That's going to do it for this episode. Please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs, Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs in both of those places. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcast. Check out the Everydayer Club and the All Access tier. You can click the link in the show notes or go to lockedonbucs.supercast.com. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to be an Everydayer Club member, it's real simple. Like this episode on YouTube. Leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It truly does help other Buccaneers fans find the show, and it tells us you appreciate what we are doing for you, bringing you this Bucs coverage. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.